When you take on the responsibility of leadership, you're not taking on additional responsibility. You're actually changing your career. I don't run a business or a leadership culture with a fear that people will leave. I run a business and a leadership culture with a fear that they won't reach their potential.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Geronimo Unfiltered podcast. My name is Dozer, your host, and I'm here back with Rohan.
Yeah, mate, pumped. Looking forward to this.
Tell you what, just for context for everyone, if they're new to the Geronimo Unfiltered podcast, Rohan's my leadership coach, dear friend of mine, big friend of the Geronimo Academy, does a lot of leadership stuff with us and some of our clients as well. Rohan's episode was like one of our first four, definitely, right? Now, Rohan's episode, How to Be a Leader People Actually Want to Follow, is one of our most listened to episodes. So,
there you go.
the people have been asking for a part two. So I've got a bunch of questions here in the realm of leadership with our guys that are, to be honest, and I say this with the most respect, I think a lot of our guys, they've almost become accidental leaders. They didn't realise they had to be good at this thing called leadership to run a successful business. Was that fair to say?
Absolutely. There's no question that when you're passionate about something and you put the accelerator down on it and it works a little bit, then you've got to do other things to make it work. And particularly in the area of gyms and PTs and staff and floor managers and all those types of things, all of a sudden you're further away from helping people with their health and closer to helping people manage the people who are paying you. There's a lot at stake.
Which might not have actually been why you got into business.
Exactly.
In this type of business, right? Okay. So, quick fire questions. This is from our people. What are the qualities of a leader and operating system of a highly effective leader?
So let's keep it in the context of gyms. I think the most important thing for leadership, my friend Shelley Johnson, she said this, and it's been kind of haunting me and impacting me for a while. She said, when you take on the responsibility of leadership, you're not taking on additional responsibility. You're actually changing your career. And so the very first thing that anybody who's doing a good job needs to understand is as soon as they start taking on leadership, they're taking on a whole new way of working.
Right.
And I think you've got to know why you're doing it. So when I was thinking about some of these things, you've got to have a real sense of purpose. You've got to have a sense of, not only do I want people to be well and healthy and take responsibility for the future they're excited for, I actually want the people that I work with to want people to do that too. So I think purpose is really, really important. I think the idea of direction, I love the phrase direction's better than goals. And I'm not saying goals are bad, but direction is about where do we want to land? Where do we want to end up? Easiest thing to do as a human is to allow ourselves to slip towards the life we don't want. And in the area of health and wellness, that actually requires us to arrest our situation, to arrest the habits, to arrest the mindsets that aren't moving us in that direction. And when you've got a passion for people's health and well-being, you actually want to point them in a direction that they can get motivated about. So I think to start with, purpose and direction are two of the most important things. Why am I doing this? And where do I want to end up? Where do I want to be happy about taking people with me to this place? And then a bunch of other things fall into place. Activities fall into place, goals fall into place, responsibilities fall into place. You've still got to be clear about them. You asked the other question about strategy. And I think structure, diary, and accountability are three really, really powerful things. Structure, diary, and those two go together, and accountability. So what I mean by that is we've all got the same amount of time to get things done. And if we've got 4 hours to get a 1 hour task done, we'll take 4 hours. So what I do is I set the allocated time in my diary, and I go, I've got an hour to get this task done. I've got 90 minutes to get this task done. I've got to make these phone calls at this particular time. So batching and planning and preparing. You do it brilliantly, right? Your Separation Sunday idea has got to be influencing, and if it's not, it should be influencing thousands of people, because you look at the allocation of time, energy, and focus. And those are the things that help us be critically more effective than other people, because it allows us to have the down times. It allows us to have the off times. It allows us to be lower in energy at a particular point, because we've used a high energy allocation at another point. Those types of things, if you can get thoughtful about that, thoughtful about what works well for you, thoughtful about how you use time, energy, focus, and structure for your gain and for your benefit, I think they can be a really powerful combination. I'm a morning person, all right? So for me, I've got to do other things in the afternoons around the business development, following things up, organizing things versus the heavy lifting in the morning.
Creation work,
ideation, design, really thinking through in detail client experience, how I want to address things, evolve things, thinking up new things. You know, I'm working on a few ideas at the moment around the 2030 leader and a bunch of other different ideas. Like what's the 2030 leader look like?
Yeah.
How do we think about that? We talk at Pragmatic Thinking all the time. Better humans make better leaders. So I'm thinking about this idea of the interaction between better humans and better leaders. What does that mean? So it's all those types of things.
So accountability, where does that come in?
Accountability is who is actually tapping me on the shoulder, checking on whether I've got things done, or who am I saying I will get this to you by?
Right.
So when you run a business like I do, when you're in business like we are, you've got commitments. And part of the things that we trade in is people trust that we do what we say we're going to do.
100% they do.
So sometimes I would literally say, I'll have that to you by 11 o'clock tomorrow, which is a social contract. It's a commitment. It reduces the amount of time and energy I've got to put into it, and I get it done. And so sometimes it's that social accountability, sometimes it's relational accountability, sometimes it's structural accountability. The team, we need to all have this done by lunchtime on Tuesday because we're going to review it on Wednesday morning or something like that.
That's awesome. That's really tactical. Love that. Second question. So those things that you just mentioned as a highly effective leader, how does someone embody that energy and make decisions from that standpoint and sort of hold in that standpoint?
Yeah, I really appreciate the idea of, well, how do we operationalize it? That's the way I approach this. I think your Separation Sunday is world class. You have put a small amount of time in a 168-hour week to think about what you do with your time.
Yeah.
And I think planning and structure and being purposeful about allocation of time and energy, what you can do when. So for example, the week that we're sitting in right now, I spent 16 hours on planes. It's actually pretty productive.
Yeah, I love it.
And it was in my diary, and I knew that I'd be doing the following 6 things on the plane. And one of those things included the new Netflix series that I've downloaded and I'm enjoying because...
You budgeted for it.
It's not all uptime. Sometimes it's downtime. And that's a really important idea. Jim Rohn, one of my mentors I never met, said, time allotted to labor. And I love that idea. So I give a certain amount of time allotted to labor, but sometimes I give a certain amount of time allotted to doing Lego with my 12-year-old son.
Yeah.
Or talking about his gibbets business.
Yeah.
Or, I know, right?
Gibbets.
I know.
Huge.
It's, well, it's a big thing, you know. Major markup, that's what I will say. Major markup. And so, you know, it's time allotted to those things. And it allows you to start and stop and be present with all of the objectives that you've got. So I think planning, allocation of time and energy, and I think the opportunity to push in and pull back are really, really useful things. So for example, you and I, we have been spending, you know, a good amount of time over the last 3 years together, but we haven't just sat down at a table. We've walked.
We've hiked. Yeah.
We've dined.
Yeah.
We've exchanged text messages, voice to text, all these types of things. And, you know, you just do it differently.
Yeah.
And it just keeps that energetic flow going really, really well.
Right. Love that. One of the things that we typically see with our people, I think it's probably goes to say for everyone, because we're all humans and we all have emotions. But, you know, the typical business owner can be very emotionally driven and swayed by shit happens and then fucking it's emotional reactions to it and panic and all this kind of stuff. How does someone kind of manage that better or manage it at all so they're not operating from just raw reactive emotions?
Yeah, look, let's start by saying emotional regulation is a mark of maturity, and maturity isn't always relative to age. So if we can think about it like that, I think it's important. Again, axioms are really powerful and important to me. And one of the leaders I've followed for years, Max Dupree, said the first job of a leader is to define reality.
Oh, wow. What does that mean?
Well, in this context, what I would be saying is, honestly, leader, how emotionally regulated are you? Where are you well emotionally regulated? And where are you less well emotionally regulated? And understanding that and understanding those triggers becomes really, really important. It's actually a very, very deep question to lean into and try and make sense of, because whenever we emotionally react or overreact to something, it's actually something that's going on really deep within us, because the speed of the reaction is almost automatic, which means we've learned it from somewhere, we've learned it from experiences, but if it's not helping us lead, there's something we need to do about changing that. So I think, what are those triggers? Where are those triggers? Is there a place where you're less effective because tiredness, water consumption, food, all those types of things can actually impact you significantly? Or you could be just ridiculously insecure and think that every time somebody gives you feedback, it's personal, and you've got to kind of defend yourself and stand up against it. And then next thing you know, you're actually fighting with clients. And it's like...
And you forgot why you were fighting.
We forget that really quickly, because it becomes about that sense of survival that goes on within us. There's a couple of strategies that I think are very useful. You can bring down your emotional regulation and your heart rate in 2 minutes of regular breathing. 2 minutes of 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out will bring down your heart rate and can re-regulate you emotionally. So a 2-minute timeout with a purposeful behavior around breathing can actually change things significantly.
So, time out for adults.
Yeah, just say, hang on a minute, I need just to have a time out. I'm going to be back in a few minutes. So that this is a useful conversation for everyone. That
takes real emotional maturity to be able to go, guys, let me have 2 minutes. Then you go off and do some breathing, 5 minutes in, 5 minutes out. So this could be a really productive conversation for everyone.
If you need to.
If I need to.
Yeah, because sometimes what happens is we get emotionally hijacked. We forget what the conversation's about, and it crashes and burns, and we're more than happy to make sure that happens, because we're so wound up emotionally.
But the damage from that could be irreparable, right?
It could be irreparable, firstly. Secondly, people begin to expect it. And that can be a real challenge. Can't tell Dave that, because last time we did,
he fucking flew it.
Exactly.
He flew off the handle.
Yeah, flew off the handle, and you become known as the person who does that. The idea of breathing and bringing down that sense of regulation is a really, really powerful one. The second one is a little bit more attached to meaning making. It takes a little bit of reflection and probably a conversation with someone that knows what they're doing. But let's just say you and I were having a conversation and you got into me about something and I started to fire up. If I was able to turn on what I think is one of the greatest sporting technologies ever, and that's the camera that looks down on the ground.
Oh, yeah, what's that called? The eagle eye?
I just love it, yeah. If you could actually turn on that camera and look at this conversation between you and I from above, press pause, and then say, all right, Rohan, how are you feeling right now? Dave's is, he's pretty fired up. He feels pretty strongly about what you're talking about. What are you making this conversation mean? And that's a real key question. Well, I'm making it mean I'm not good enough. I'm making it mean I haven't hit the mark. I'm making it mean he doesn't approve of me. And all this happens in seconds, split seconds. But if you can actually pause the tape for a minute, look down on the conversation and say, what am I making it mean?
Yeah, wow.
And if I made it mean something more useful, what would that be? I remember one time this happened to me and I got cornered at a meeting, and I was called to the meeting with one purpose in mind, and I worked out really, really early on in the meeting that wasn't the reason for me being here. And I remember distinctly stopping and saying, okay, what's going on? I'm being cornered.
Wow.
It's possible I'm about to get trapped and held responsible for something that's got nothing to do with me. What am I making this mean? I'm making it mean that I'm in trouble and I need to defend myself. If I made it mean something more useful, what would that be? It would be they really want to find out my honest perspective and the truth, and I don't have anything to answer for. All that happened in split seconds.
Wow.
And my emotional energy came down, and we ended up having a valuable conversation where I felt emotionally regulated, but I also stood up for myself. Now, this was 15 years ago, so a bit of time has passed since then, but the principle remains the same. So this idea of breathing, pulling your regulation down, but also meaning making. Am I making this mean something that's firing up my emotions? And could I make it mean something that was more useful to us in the conversation right now?
Fuck. That's solid. That's really solid. So when you say that, a lot of our studio owners, at the end of every week, we get them to track their numbers. And ultimately, there's a number at the bottom, whether they've grown or not, and how much by. Some of them just make that as a reflection about them rather than some of the metrics that sit on that sheet.
Yeah, exactly. And even in the context of gym sessions or numbers and marketing, that's a great example because they can actually grab that number and hold that number up. And if they're able to hold that number up or hold that result up or hold that situation up and introduce it to the conversation as a third part of the conversation, they're able to look at that and say, what contributed to that? What did we do? What did we not do? What did we learn? What have we got to do differently? And again, that takes time and practice and intentionality. But when you can see the number almost as a third part of the conversation, or see the result as a third part of the conversation, or use something in the gym during the session as an additional part of the conversation, you can depersonalize it. And
that's interesting. So depersonalize it. So one thing that you've taught us is like whenever we have feedback sessions or have tough conversations at work, we now walk around with a water bottle and we're talking to the water bottle. The third thing,
space, yeah,
rather than the person, because it's, even though I don't mean it about the person personally, it's more about the behaviour, and this kind of objectifies and depersonalises that person to their behaviour.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would be a shout out my role as CEO at Pragmatic Thinking.
Yeah.
We've got a piece of work called Dealing with the Tough Stuff.
Right.
And it's an absolute bestseller. It's it's a hit every single year, every single time it delivers. And that's what it talks about. It talks about this idea of how do you depersonalize and de-escalate a conversation around performance and feedback. And you can even do that with yourself.
Oh, wow.
You can do it. You can do it by having a third space, a journal, a book, a note. And then when you have the conversation with somebody else, or you have the conversation with a client or a staff member, that third shared visual medium becomes the way things can be depersonalized. Now, as I'm sharing this with you, Dozer, one of the things I'm thinking about is sometimes we need that number in the box to tell us something.
Yeah.
We need that number in the box to tell us whether or not our inputs have been right, whether or not our effort has been in the right direction or in the right vein. And sometimes we've got to sit squarely with the disappointment in the outcome, not necessarily
I'm glad
ourselves.
you're saying this.
Sit disappointed in the outcome and commit to doing something differently. Right?
And that takes leadership too.
It does. It takes self-leadership. It takes somebody willing to point out the challenge, but also offer support.
Yeah.
Those types of things become really, really important. And a lot of this rolls back up to the question we started with, like, why are we doing this? Where do we want to end up? What are we going to celebrate together? And those two questions, they're agnostic. You can use them anywhere. You can use them as a business leader. You can use them as a partner. You can use them as a parent. You can use them as a friend. You can use them with a client. They really are powerful. And then as you roll down to more detail, it gets more and more difficult to run away from whether or not we did the work.
More and more difficult to run away
from
whether we did the work or not.
Right? Again, you'll hear me talk about Jim Rohn until,
I love it.
End of days. He goes, it's a box. It's only big enough for a number, not
a story. I love that when he says that. Yeah.
I know. It's so good.
Okay. Well, speaking of feedback, one of the questions that we get all the time for our owners is how to have performance reviews or give my staff feedback. Is there a really simple strategy for these guys?
Yeah, it's the first thing that I love to get people to talk about. And typically I do it by asking. And I would say, have you had a conversation about the way people like to be encouraged?
Right, okay.
I always start at the high notes. And they go, no, we're just telling they're a good, we're Australians.
Keep going.
Good on you, mate. You're awesome. You're a legend.
Yeah.
When we can even say it and get more and more Australian in the way that we communicate it to them. But the number one thing is to have the conversation. And I would be hey, Dozer, I'm so curious. How do you like to be told? And I would say it like this. I would say, you can see my body. I've got some energy. I'm enthusiastic. How do you like to be told you're doing a good job? Because some people, the words aren't as important as the recognition or being put up in the Facebook group or however we do it.
WhatsApp.
It's exactly, shout out to, thank you for. We've got a Slack channel called PT Big Love. Where if someone's done something, it goes on there. And we've got photos and they're all funny and enjoyable and quirky, but they're all us. And I would start there. And then I would follow that up with, if you want to be corrected well or being given feedback that really lands, how do you like to be given feedback? And when I share this story, Dozer, I go back over 30 years where I had 3 people reporting to me and I asked them those questions.
3 different answers?
One's like you and I, said, tell me straight, don't mince your words. If you're soft, I'll be really disappointed in you. Right?
Seriously?
Yeah. The second was, ask me a few questions and get me to think about why it didn't work out well. And the third was a deeply, deeply empathetic feeling person. And they simply said, come up and stand next to me and ask me if I'm okay. 3 completely different strategies.
And if you got them wrong,
I could really damage people.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd be unclear with you and you'd not respect that. And I could really push the more empathetic person around. So I simply say, when in doubt, as a leader, ask. So that's where I start. And then the other piece ties straight back into the conversation we have in Tough Stuff at Pragmatic Thinking. It finishes with this idea of using 2 and 3 point communication. 2-point communication is eye contact, it's personal, rapport and trust. Whenever I want to maintain rapport, build trust and keep it relational, I make eye contact. Whenever I need to actually introduce the idea of what needs to be done differently, the behaviour that needs to change, I introduce a shared visual medium and I look at that and I say, this is the report, these are the numbers, this is what the review said. Now, what we need to do is we need to have a conversation about how we can move these things forward for your benefit. You can even feel it now. What I'm doing is when things need to change, I'm looking here. When you're experiencing me on your side, I'm looking at you. And so this idea of introducing the shared visual medium or the third space is a really, really powerful piece of nonverbal communication.
God.
It really does change the game. What I will add, though, is I'm a neurotypical white Western Gen Xer. Like I am beige as they come, in that area. Right? I was taught that all of life was eye contact. And all of life was a firm handshake and stand up straight. And all those types of things. And now I understand from good behavioural science is that if I want to depersonalise the conversation or if I want to give feedback that lands, I introduce the third space and I focus on that. It can be a whiteboard, it can be a shared screen, it can be a water bottle, it can be weekly numbers, it can be a moleskin, it can be any of those things. But as soon as you introduce the shared visual space or the third space, you look at that when you focus on behavioural change and you maintain eye contact to maintain the connection and the relationship. It's not as easy as it sounds, but it's worth it. It's really, really powerful. And I still have to deliberately work to break eye contact and depersonalise the conversation because my nature is to look at you when we're talking to each other. And even as a parent, I can make it really personal for my kids when I need to have a firm conversation with them. And I've messed that up, which I regret. And I like to work on it a little bit differently. And I practiced it on the weekend. Actually, I had to have a chat to my son about some things. And we were driving in the car. So we were literally shoulder to shoulder and looking out the windscreen.
Which is the third thing.
And we just had a little chat about some things that were going on at school and we came up with some good strategies that he could introduce and things he needed to take responsibility for. But it was side by side as opposed to squaring off with each other.
So does that, from someone who receives, like on the other end of me, so to speak, from a leadership perspective, and just also as a bit of a spokesperson for all the managers out there, how does that change how you receive feedback or for those weeks where things didn't go to plan?
Second you try and give me feedback in the way that you want to hear it, I will crumble. I'm already beating myself up, so I'm not hearing what you're saying anyway. And it will probably take me a lot longer to actually recover from that and then do something about it than if you just walked with me in the first place and had consideration for how I would be receiving it. Not to take responsibility for my emotions, but it's in both of our best interests that I hear it in the right way.
Would you agree with that, Rohan?
Yeah, it's so important. And this is why I went back to that first question. How do you like to be encouraged? How do you like to be corrected? If we really work at working well together, how do I get the best out of you by telling you you did a great job? And how do I get the best out of you by bringing correction, change, and challenge? How do you like to hear it? What normally happens to you when you get feedback? Invite those conversations. Have the conversation before the conversation. And I think as a leader, our role is not necessarily to get up every day. We've got to be everybody's best friend. That would be a risk for me. Our role is to actually help people feel proud of themselves because of what they've accomplished and who they're becoming. And that requires effort. And if you don't know, ask. This is a critical piece for me. I would often say, have you had a conversation around how you do encouragement, how you do feedback, how you do correction, how you get the most out of each other? And more often than not, teams would look back at me and say, we haven't had that conversation yet. We've just assumed people know what to do and they know how to do their jobs. I said, you're missing out on a whole nother realm of performance because you understand each other at that point. And as a coach, a leader, a studio manager, if you don't know, ask.
I feel like we should get you a t-shirt that says that. If you don't know, ask. That's huge.
Yeah. And I often deprecate a little bit. I would say, listen, I know I should know the answer to this.
Okay. Yeah.
But I need a bit of help to get it really right. You know, or as I said to people in the airline industry this week with delayed flights and all that, I said, I'm going to ask you a question that I bet you haven't been asked today. And they laugh and they go, only 100 times, you know. And so, you know, you work out how to create the connection and how to build the rapport. But if you don't know, ask.
Here's a big one. What if you've taken over a team? It's quite often it's like a studio would sell to a new owner and they're not normally like uber performing studios. There's probably been some underperforming studios, and with that there's a culture that kind of comes with that. How do you go about creating a cultural shift with a small team that might have some gems in there, but they've probably become complacent?
Yeah, look, once again, you've got to figure out what you're trying to achieve. Right? So if I've taken over a business, and I've done this.
Yes, I.
So I've been introduced to a business, to an organisation that required significant cultural and strategic change. And I do the very first thing that we've already talked about. The first job of a leader is to define reality. Define reality. And you're wanting to define reality in a number of different spaces. And one of them, obviously, is your business strategy. So what is the business? What are we trying to achieve? And how are we going relative to market or relative to industry? Another one is obviously our financial strategy. What are the numbers telling us? Which direction are they headed? What colour are they? Because that all gives you pretty immediate feedback. But the one we forget the most is our people strategy.
Right.
And we forget to say, what do we know about our people? What are their aspirations? What are they willing to contribute to the team moving forward? And you've got to get clear on that. At the same time, you bought this business for a reason, or you've been bought into this business for a reason. What is that?
What is that reason?
Yeah. And I love to use a 2x2 around support challenge.
Love this one.
Okay. So
you've taught us this.
How powerful is it?
So good.
Now, the reason why 2x2s are important is because when you know where you are in the 2x2, you can work out which direction you've got to go. So complacency is usually too much support and not enough challenge.
Wait. This is huge. So guys, listen to this. 2x2 Rohan means like a X and Y axis, and there's like high, low. So poor culture, or if there's like complacency, is when there's too much support and not enough challenge or accountability. So,
or not enough support or challenge. People are just left to do their own thing. So whichever way, you're bottom to the left or top to the left. You're not where you want to be.
So that's if you're always there for your team, which is not a bad thing, but if you're always there for your team, but no one's got KPIs, no one's accountable for everything, and if there's any stuff ups, you as the owner, they know that you're always going to be the one to sort of fix things.
If you're rescuing.
And there's a lot of rescuing happening in our...
Essentially doing the job you've employed someone to do, you then do it.
Why do people do that?
When you're an owner, and you know this, and I know this, it's a whole nother level of responsibility. You eat it, you sleep it, you dream about it, you care about it in a realm that's difficult to describe to people.
Yes.
The difference is recognizing that and inviting people into the journey of making it better. But back to that point, I think the first thing you've got to figure out is what's going on with our people and who wants to be part of the future. And again,
Big one.
if I don't know, I ask. So I literally would say to people, my first 8 weeks in this particular role, I interviewed everybody personally and in detail. And I said, tell me your dream. Tell me your dream for here. And it would very, very quickly become apparent whether or not they'd either lost interest, whether or not they couldn't see themselves in the story or the picture here anymore, or whether they just didn't want to be part of it. And at some point, you've actually got to make some pretty tough decisions as a leader around whether or not people are coming with you, whether or not you need to make a change. And usually addressing complacency is a combination of those things. Where it really becomes important, though, I think, is where we're saying, what is it that we need to introduce? And if complacency is too much support and not enough challenge, you've got to introduce a challenge. You've got to introduce a project. You've got to introduce a target. You've got to introduce a deadline. The way you do that, though, is really, really important. So I wouldn't necessarily ask people if they agree with the target or if they agree with the objective, but I would ask them to participate relationally and collectively on how we get there and how we achieve it and what that would mean for us and where they think they can contribute naturally and easily and where they think it would be hard for them. So introducing the idea of a new target, a new project, a new way of getting things done, and then supporting them towards the idea of getting a new standard or a new culture. So that'd be the first way. I'd introduce challenge. But again, just to reference, a bit shamelessly to reference PT, but that, that's
Please.
my world and our passion to market is we talk about this idea of ways of working and a behavioural compass. I've moved away from the idea of mission, vision, values, and I've moved more to the idea of identity and behaviours, because behaviours are the direct link to what we have and don't have in business.
Yeah.
Did we do it or did we not do it?
Yeah.
And usually in complacent cultures, we haven't got clear about the behaviours we're going to be accountable to. And we go through the process, we ask the question, if we were doing the best job that we could possibly do as a team, what would we be doing? What behaviours do we commit to? And they need to scare us a little bit. And then if we were doing the worst job as a team, what would we allow?
Yeah, wow.
What would we walk past? What would we sign off on?
Yeah.
And I think you've got to have those conversations. And then you let people go, well, where do you sit on it? How well do you think you're going? Are we ready to accept? Because leadership's not about agreement. Leadership's about acceptance. Are we ready to accept that these are the behaviours we'll sign on to? And some people might not. And that's when I call when a subtraction is an addition. When somebody leaves and you go, excellent, that's exactly what they needed to do. And so those ideas of introduce a challenge and clarify behaviours are, I think, two of your best bets to address complacency.
Wow. What advice would you give to leaders with that kind of people-pleasing tendency? Because there's a lot. We work with a lot. They bless their cotton socks, and then we work with their teams as well. So we can see this happening. What would your advice be?
Gosh, this one's harder than it sounds.
Yeah, I know.
And you know me well enough to know I'm not interested in like the bumper sticker answer.
Yeah.
This takes time.
Yeah.
Leadership's difficult. It requires energy, commitment, self-management. It requires a commitment to yourself and a commitment to others that's unusually greater than just rocking up, punching on and punching off the clock. And if you've got people-pleasing tendencies, you have a lid on your ability to lead, because that will stop you taking responsibility for the accountability that people need to perform at the level that the business needs. If you've got people-pleasing tendency, you'll be conflict averse. If you've got people-pleasing tendencies, you'll do other people's jobs. If you've got people-pleasing tendencies, you'll accept a standard that your business should not accept. So the first thing is to move the conversation between being about us to being about the business. The third space.
The third space.
We owe the business this.
We owe the business this.
Our responsibility to the business is this.
We still talk about members. Our members need this.
That's right.
Yeah.
We did this at the start of the year at PT. We moved some people's roles and responsibilities around, and I actually got some work taken out of my remit, which has been really useful for the business. But I got some things put back in, and I'm the CEO, and that everybody in the business, it's the one that makes me the most uncomfortable. And we have a team dynamic that can handle this stuff well. And so I got asked in front of everybody, hey, Rohan, you're going to struggle the most with this. How do you feel about that? And I'm like, great. Yeah, can't wait. And I said, you know what? It's not my natural go-to, but it's good for the business.
Wow.
And year on year, when you're up 30%, I can do that. I can do that because it's good for the business. So to shift it from being about you and me and Dave and Shaz, is this good for the business? That's the first thing. The second thing is have a really good think about what the people-pleasing tendency is costing you, and at what point will you be unable to do it any longer? Because it's unsustainable. Now, I had a chance to think about this, and the third one I actually would advise is get a little bit of help.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
So again, your temperament is like, you just got to stop doing that.
Yeah.
Actually have someone mentor, guide, direct, encourage, corral me and say, don't let them off. Don't do the job for them. Don't take on other people's jobs.
What if they're afraid to push and to hold people accountable in case that person leaves?
Again, it's got a layer of trickiness because depending on the industry, depending on the market, the workforce is moving around a lot and people are talking about retention. My overall view is if you've got someone who you are carrying and everyone in the business knows is being carried, then their departure is ultimately better for the business. There might be a short-term pain, but there'll be a medium-term gain. And I've got no doubts about that because even if somebody who replaced them was responsible to do their role, that is better for you and everybody else. And so I don't run a business or a leadership culture with a fear that people will leave. I run a business and a leadership culture with a fear that they won't reach their potential. And that's the reframe, okay? The reframe is, in order for us to do the right thing by the business, and in order for you to grow into the potential that I see in you, I want to have a conversation with you about this, this, and this. Which one of those is the most important? Okay, it's this one. All right, well, let's talk about the changes that we can make, because the impact on the business by you doing this looks like, X, Y, and we can change it. And what I most want to know is, are you up for that challenge?
Oh,
do you want to grow? Do you want to change? Do you want to learn? Do you want to... And some people will say no and be okay with that. Some people will be okay with that clocking in and clocking off, and you need to decide if you want someone that is on your team that's doing that. And it's not perfect all the time. But it's really important that instead of just saying, I'm doing your job for you, it's actually turning it into something that's good for the business and good for the person. How can we make these changes so that you grow and we grow?
And is that your answer to how can you empower your team members without micromanaging them? Because micromanaging, I think, is a thing that's kind of the opposite side of the spectrum. We can sometimes get owners that, when they're kind of earlier on in their kind of leadership maturity, they will tend to default to rescuing and people pleasing. And then you've got some that go the other way and they micromanage.
Yeah, so you over-engineer everything.
Did you call the lead, Dave? What? Did you call the lead? Yeah. What'd they say? What's that twist there? Like, what are the key steps to empowering your team without micromanaging them?
Yeah, one of the things that I've loved about the theme of this conversation is I think preparation is just as important as performance.
Wow.
And in all of the conversations that we've had, feedback, criticism, people pleasing, so many of these things can be addressed by having a conversation before we go into performance mode together, before we go into building the business or delivering to a client or running a group or whatever it is. So what is micromanagement? Right? Micromanagement means that one or both of the parties are anxious about whether something's done right, and you're going to get the outcome. So there's an underlying experience under there. So again, so much of it comes down to is, are we clear on the outcome? Are we clear on the expectation? Are we clear on the process? And a couple of other things that are really important that I always ask. I use a coaching question. So you know where we're headed, right? And you know what the time frame and the deliverable is. Yep. Okay. Tell me in your own words.
Okay, so replay.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. On a scale, and this is the question, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, get out of my way, I'm about to knock you over because I am coming at this. 1 being, I wish I didn't get picked. You know, are you 10 confident that you can tackle this project, or are you 1 confident?
Great question. Fucking great question.
And I just say, give me a number. And it's not because I don't think you're competent. I just want to know. And if they say 8, I say 8, that is awesome. Thank you. All right. So now I know I'm talking to an 8. When does an 8 come back and ask me if they need something? When should I talk to an 8 if I need to check in on that information?
And you know, I've already picked up here that you're talking about an 8. So now that's a third thing. Like, it's an 8, not
there
Dave.
You go. There you go. Now, if they say 3, you go, okay, 3's low, all right? In anyone's books. Anything below 7's a low, by the way. But you go 3, you go, okay, 3. You know what? I am so grateful you have told me that this task sounds a little bit out of reach at the moment. What kind of a task does it need to be for us to get to an 8? All right. And then essentially, as soon as I say this, even saying this to you right now, I'm assessing their suitability. But what you're looking for is you're looking for the conversation and the process that you can go through with somebody so that when you have to have the micromanaging or the feedback or the difficult or the don't give me your job conversation, you've already got something in the bank.
Wow.
And that's the critical piece. It's why I think Michael Bungay-Stanier gets it right when he talks about, as a leader, one of the things that will serve you is being coach-like.
Right.
Asking questions, being curious, trying to make sense of things, understanding where people are coming from, withholding judgment, all these types of things. And if you can increase that question and energy ratio, you're really moving people in the direction of, I'm for you, but we are going after this result. And we want to perform on that together because people want to be part of something that performs and performs well. And the more we can create the environment and the conversation and the pathway for people to contribute to that, the better we are, I think, in our leadership and with our people. And that applies to studios as much as it applies to my barista.
God, I love when you come on the podcast.
I love doing it.
This is just, if we can help our owners along and become better leaders, their impact in all these communities all around the world can 10x. And then collectively, this could literally be helping 1 million people every single fucking week.
Yeah, I've got no doubt. And not just helping that many people, but you think about that many people with the greatest free drug in the world, endorphins, right?
Yeah.
Their health and well-being is improved. Their commitment to their life and their longevity is improved. The way they feel about themselves has improved. And that's the clients, not the studio manager.
Correct.
Think about the studio manager who can wake up and think to themselves, I know how to lead people.
Yes.
I'm not guessing anymore.
No.
I've got evidence that I can influence.
I'm actually doing this.
I can set direction and I can move people towards a better future. That is a humbling and a very empowering responsibility for someone to step into.
Wow.
And it's why the idea of preparation is so important. You know, Lincoln said, I will study, I will prepare, and my opportunity will come. It's the commitment to getting ready before you need to be ready. And that's, I think, one of the most powerful invitations to the clients in this conversation. Focus on getting ready because you will need these skills. You'll need them next week, next month, and next year.
So, 2 more questions and then we'll wrap up. This has been awesome. Does everyone have it in them to be a good leader?
The old leader's born, not made. It's not the easiest question to answer in a soundbite. I think everybody's got it in them to have influence of some kind. And one writer, John Maxwell, describes leadership as influence. And I think you want to be looking for people that have a propensity to take on responsibility, to create something out of nothing, so to speak, to lean into the determination and the drive to get something done that perhaps hasn't been done before. Now, my leadership style fundamentally fixes things. I'm good at good at fixing things. And there is a point at which I need to hand things off to somebody who can scale things and I can continue to drive the ideation and the fundamentals and the foundations. I know that about myself as a leader.
Same.
And so I'm good at working with teams that they're not remedial, but they do need adjustments. And so at the risk of wanting to be careful to not answer yes and no, it's not a binary question. I think everybody can improve and increase their influence and their capability to engage and move people forward. And I think that in the context of building a business, running a studio, whatever it is that I'm doing, I'm looking for people with a natural propensity to step up even more and lead others even more. And I'm wanting to grab a hold of that and develop that as much as I can. If everybody could be leaders in the sense of taking us to places where we haven't been or gone before, then everybody would be doing it.
Right.
And they're not. And I think we can improve the quality of leaders everywhere. And we can do that by being really purposeful about our people strategy, really purposeful about the way we introduce people to leadership, train people in leadership, and help people lead together. I think that's a really critical piece as well.
That's what you do
At PT.
at PT.
Yeah, we say we make a difference to the difference makers. And our particular interest is in companies, organisations that have middle managers. And the middle managers are the connective glue in an organisation. They have somebody they report up to, and they have generally people that report into them. And they've got to be the translators and the carriers and the custodians of the culture and the vision and the communication of the organisation. And if we can 5x or 10x the middle managers in an organisation, you will see significant changes in culture and performance and outcomes. I've got no doubt about that at all.
Oh, man, this has been mind-blowing, honestly. I can't wait to get this episode out there and get this into the ears of every single owner that we know, because I just know that they are such good people that want to do a better job, and they know
And that's critical.
So this is the episode that I'm going to send them to. All right, last question. I ask everyone. I think I asked you last time as well. What question do you wish I'd asked you, and how would you have answered it?
I wish you would have asked me, what are you thinking about and learning about in leadership right now?
And how would you have answered it?
And I would have said that I am thinking about, I hinted at it before.
2030?
Yeah. And as a business, we're thinking about this too, where post-pandemic, the world has changed dramatically. There's a lot of different things going on. 70% of the workforce will be Gen Z by 2030. And the leadership style that I have and I grew up with, it is outdated in the sense that it needs to change, develop, and adapt. AI is not just on our doorstep, but on our phones. And there's a number of different things going on around us. And I am obsessing about what the 2030 leader needs to look like. And one of the ways I'm thinking it through is, well, what won't change? Not just what will change, but what won't change. How will we become better humans with more established character, with a commitment to principles that work? How will we become more confident and competent in the ability to notice what's going on for people, to name it for them, to draw out the best, to genuinely care and be curious, and invite people into something pretty inspiring and a little bit scary around what the future could be and how we can perform well to get there. My head is going around and around and around, thinking about that, thinking about the balance between the people skills, the technological skills, and the market influences that are going to deliver the 2030 leader. We're thinking about that as a business. We're thinking about specific areas around psychosocial safety, around the idea of design thinking, all of these things all combined together. And we're going, what's the wave that we need to be riding into the future that will really serve people? I get excited by that.
God, I'm excited about that now.
Yeah, I find myself researching it constantly.
This is your jam. This is your jam. Thank you for being back on the Geronimo Unfiltered podcast, mate. Where can people find you?
I'm the CEO of Pragmatic Thinking, so pragmatichthinking.com. LinkedIn is the best place, Rohan Dredge. I sound like this, I look like this. Obviously also on some other social platforms too, but they're the best ones. Or Rohan at pragmatichthinking.com.
Perfect. Thanks for coming on board, mate.
Pleasure, mate. Love it. Love it.
Catch up for a steak soon.
I'll look forward to that.
Listeners, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I know everyone will get something out of that. So listen to that episode again, write down all your notes and turn that into actions. With that, see you in the next episode. Bye.